From the very beginning of the creation, a marvelous design has been evident. All nature abounds with evidence of creation and a creator. Venture into this exciting realm with an open mind and a commitment to truth.
Welcome back to segment 2 of Creation in Symphony. In the last session, we learned that evolution just won't work, admitted by major scholars in major scientific fields of discipline. But will creation work? How did the dinosaurs fit into the creation model? If everything is recent, why don't we have dinosaurs around anymore? Is there a worldwide flood experience recorded in the scientific data? What research avenue will give us some conclusive answers to this? Well, let's now consider the creation model in detail. I'd like to present to you Creation in Symphony, the complete model. The creation model is stated like this initially: in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament. And let this firmament be separated from the waters above and the waters beneath." And God made the firmament and saw that it was good. The creation model answers so many problems. It begins like this: in the beginning, God. I will not in this lecture, nor any series of lectures or private conversation, attempt to define or prove the existence of God. As Wernher von Braun, one of the greatest scientists of this century, stated, "Why do we need a candle to light the influence of the sun? God needs no proof. In the beginning, God existed. He always has existed. If I or any other speaker or communicator or scholar could give you proof of God, that would essentially mean academically that we would have created God or held the capacity to create God. We cannot create God. He created us. Therefore, I do not suggest a proof for God. I simply expose evidences that He does exist. In fact, I'd like to give you the statements of some of the leading scholars of the world in various areas of scientific discipline. British physicist H.S. Lipson said, "Evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit it. To my mind, the theory of evolution does not stand up at all." He continued, "I think, however, that we must go further than this and admit that the only acceptable explanation is creation." Now, if creation is the only academic explanation for what we see and feel and know and are, there had to be a creator behind that creation. Sir Frederick Hoyle stated, "Observing the universe, I have to believe it's an intellectual structure I'm looking at, not mere chance. It's designed, it's orchestrated." Frank Tipler, in an interview with Omni magazine just a few months ago, stated, "If you do a consistent physical analysis, God just falls out." Now, here's an atheist talking. Here's a scholar who has written various publications in leading journals regarding his atheism, but he has now done somewhat of an about-face, and he stated, "If you do a consistent physical analysis, God just falls out. He is there in an intrinsic, essential way, not just put in to cover our ignorance." And to that degree, I would agree with his statement. George Ellis, co-author with Stephen Hawking of The Large-Scale Structure of Space-Time, one of the world's great physicists and astrophysicists, stated, "The construction of nature points to a purposeful designer." With that in mind, who is this designer? What is he like? We can observe the universe and find various factors in existence. For instance, there's limitless space, unending time, perpetual motion, unbounded variety, infinite complexity. Look further and you'll find consciousness, feeling, will. You'll observe ethical values, religious values, beauty, justice, love, and life. No one could deny these entities exist. As Dr. Henry Morris pointed out, the first cause of limitless space has to be infinite in extent. The first cause of unending time must be eternal in duration. The first cause of perpetual motion must be omnipotent in power. The first cause of unbounded variety must be omnipresent in phenomena. The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient in intelligence. The first cause of consciousness must be personal. The first cause of feeling must be emotional. The first cause of will must be volitional. The first cause of ethical values must be moral. The first cause of religious values must be spiritual. The first cause of beauty must be aesthetic. The first cause of justice must be just. The first cause of love must be loving. The first cause of life must be living. My friend, I submit to you that the first cause of the universe, the designer of the entire universe, is the God of the Bible. There is no other plausible candidate. The God of the Bible is the God of creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Let's examine in some detail that concept. We have produced a chart under our auspices, gleaning from background physical concepts of the evolutionary model on the bottom, Big Bang theory or steady state theory, all involve various areas of expression. And we have seen in the last lecture that that just won't work. Now let's see if creation will work. In the beginning, God. The God of the Bible is a God consistent with the universe that He designed. For instance, in the universe you find triplets. In human expression you find a response to triplets. In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln used triplets. And that's one of the reasons it's permanently etched in the minds and attention of men worldwide through the centuries. Triplets in the Bible, triplets in the universe are observed. For instance, you'll find energy, motion, and phenomena. You'll find time as past, present, and future. You'll find that the biblical concept of God and the logical concept of God is not 1 + 1 + 1, but instead it's 3 in 1, 1 × 1 × 1. God the Father is the expression who lived eternally. God the Son is the eternal expression who had no beginning, will have no ending, but had a temporal expression in time. God the Holy Spirit is the expression of God in tangible, explicit form to the creation as such by influence. So you have 1 × 1 × 1, God the Father, manifesting God the Son, who sent forth and influences you through the Holy Spirit. In the beginning, God created. The biblical record states that all things were made by Jesus Christ, and all things consist by Him. Thus, we have a likeness of Christ expressed as the primary author in the creation event. And that's logical and consistent. Please understand, we're not making a likeness of any God to worship. We're giving an expression that's logical. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, that's quite consistent with scientific research. The heaven is a plural singular in the Hebrew. It essentially means the space-time dimension. It's a field of expression involving time, involving energy, involving an actual dimension. The space-time dimension, the background universe. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that space-time dimension, and the earth. But this earth was created as a sphere of water on day number 1. Some activities were manifest of God on day number 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then on day number 7, God rested. Not because He was tired, but God rested because He was finished. Each day is a literal solar day. More about that in a moment. There was a time when I believed that these were eons of time, even in the biblical Christian mosaic of creation. But academically, it's impossible for these to be eons of time. These have to be literal time dimension expressions. For instance, the earth has a magnetic field. That magnetic field is losing its energy exponentially. In 1835, Carl Gauss of Germany, for the first time in history, measured the Earth's geomagnetic field. In 1839, he began to measure it regularly, measured it the rest of his life. After his life, others took up the task, and we have 140 years of data in the U.S. Publishing Office, Washington, D.C., giving the actual calculations, historical calculations, of the strength or moment of the Earth's magnetic field, geomagnetic field. Now, Dr. Thomas Barnes, who at that time was head of the physics department, University of Texas at El Paso, took these data and put them in the computer, and he found that not only is the magnetic field of the Earth losing its intensity and extending its lines because it's limber, it's more loose, it has lost its energy. Others had certainly observed that we were losing the energy. But Dr. Barnes put these data in the computer, and he found that we're losing this energy exponentially. Now that's extremely significant. That gave him a handle on how strong the field was in the past. Now, the strength of that field in the past, every 7 to 1400 years, doubles according to these calculations, and with an exponential decay. That means that if you double it every few hundred years, if you go back as far as 10,000 years ago, doubling it every few hundred years, the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field would have been so powerful that enzymes necessary for life processes and enzymes inside the functioning cell could not have held together due to the intensity of that energy. If you go back as far as 15 to 20,000 years ago, the energy of the Earth's geomagnetic field would have approximated that of a magnetic star, and many of the atoms in planet Earth could not have held together. I'm simply saying to you in the audience that the Earth is young, the entire system is young. And further in this lecture, we'll talk about the orchestrated design of that entire creation. In the beginning, God created the heaven, that's the space-time dimension, and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. It was a sphere of water. And God said, "Let there be light." Is that consistent with scientific research? Leading physicists have admitted that in the beginning there was light, and that light possessed the radiant energy to be transformed into atoms and suns and stars, and ultimately into life processes itself. It all began as light. In the beginning, God created the heaven, space-time dimension, and the earth as a sphere of water, and then said, "Let there be light." We come to another question. If God created the space-time dimension and then planet Earth as a sphere of water, how is that consistent with bringing forth light? Recently, Scientific American, February 1995, issued an article of major import. Scholars at UCLA found a very special phenomena or phenomenon expressed in various phenomena, plural, They found that when water, pure water, has a vibratory encapsulation of a space, we would call that a bubble, that the vibratory expression, sound, causes that bubble to collapse to the point where it reaches 100,000 degrees Fahrenheit in temperature and actually burst forth as light. They call this sonoluminescence. They've actually recorded the entire spectra of this light. Here we have the time expression. Here we have the bubble radius expression in microns. We have the height of the bubble, the collapse of the bubble, and then we have its ultimate total collapse. We have the sine wave or sound wave, which is in a sine wave expression. The sound wave is simply the entrance of sound introduced through a recorder for them, and then the actual light expressed in the laboratory at UCLA and reported in Scientific American, February 1995. You'll find the long wave expressed, the visible expression, visible light. Most of the light was in the ultraviolet shortwave range with a tremendous amount of power. Once again, I want you to see an actual bubble of light generated just by sound. I'm saying that this step in the creation model is very plausible, scientifically plausible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, originally as a sphere of water on day number 1, and God said, "Let there be light." He had His own energy of sound, capability of creation, and a source of water from which to create the light, if that was His design. I'm not saying that God the Creator, in the person of Jesus Christ, used the water of the earth from which to create the light, but I'm saying that scientifically that has been found plausible. And the next statement of the creation model is, "And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." We have illustrated this first on day number 1. There was simply a sphere of water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Water is a very unique compound, hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It has very unique characteristics. It's dipole. It has its own little magnetic field. It has its orientation north and south, or negative and positive. It is a molecular combination which actually in physics means that the 2 elements, hydrogen and oxygen, could be transmuted ultimately to provide all of the elements we find in the entire spectra of elements here and throughout the universe. Water with hydrogen can transmute the early elements. Oxygen can be transmuted to the higher elements. There's a barrier between 7 and 8 in physics. You scholars will understand what I'm talking about. But in the creation model, that's already solved by the creation of oxygen along with hydrogen on day number 1. Water has a unique characteristic in that it operates in a random order. The molecules operate each independently. They don't line up. But again, back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Anytime the Spirit of God moves upon anyone or anything, He aligns the object upon which, or the person over whom He is moving. If it's an object of water, a sphere of water, the alignment does something very special. I already mentioned that water is dipole, that is positive and negative. It has its own little magnetic field or electromagnetic field. If you add energy sufficient to align the entire sphere of water, then the entire mass takes upon itself an electromagnetic field consistent with the strength of the total amount of fields in the water. Did you get that? simply by aligning the water, the Spirit of God would have automatically generated a magnetic field around that sphere of water. That magnetic field is extremely important. The Earth's geomagnetic field is actually essential for life processes. What I'm suggesting to you is that in His marvelous design, the Creator of the universe had the answer before we had the problem. An outstanding Russian scholar and an American scholar, Robert O. Becker, Nobel candidate, have collectively provided some impeccable data to show that all biological systems function on the energy of the Earth's magnetic field, electromagnetic field, geomagnetic field. The cellular information, the exchange of information on the cellular level is both chemical and electromagnetic. One reason today we have a decay in episodes of life and function of life is that we are losing the strength in that magnetic field. Watch very closely. Without that field in sufficient strength, we don't have sufficient chemical and electromagnetic communication on a cellular level. A high school student, a junior high school student, suggested to NASA that they do a very important experiment. He suggested 64 fertilized hen eggs, just chicken eggs. And he suggested that he keep 32 of those in a control and send 32 of those out into space on the shuttle. He suggested that 2 eggs on Earth and 2 eggs sent out with a shuttle be fertilized just a couple of days. And incrementally, the rest of the eggs in pairs would be fertilized various numbers of days. They did that. They had the 32 on Earth in a control chamber. They had the 32 sent out into space above the influence of the surface geomagnetic field. That's extremely important. Above the influence, direct influence of gravity, but more importantly, above the surface influence of the Earth's magnetic field. When they brought them back, all eggs that were in the control chamber on planet Earth hatched. All eggs that were sent out into space hatched, except the 2 eggs that had only been fertilized, had only been laid 2 days. They'd only had 2 days of Earth's magnetic field influence in mitosis. The others had a number of days later, 4, 8, 16, etc., all the way up to incubation time. Now, that means that mitosis in division of the cell to function properly requires the Earth's magnetic field. On day number 1, as the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, that magnetic field was formed. That also provided a basis for day number 3. This day is one of my most intriguing areas of research. Back to the creation model. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, space-time dimension, and the earth as a sphere of water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. The light He called day, and the darkness He called night. That means this sphere of water was in motion with a regular rotation. Verse number 6 of Genesis chapter 1 states, "And God said, let there be a firmament." We've expressed this firmament with this model done by the world-famous artist Robert Summers. And this firmament is expressed as a bubble of water over the surface of the earth. Remember that at the time this firmament was built, on day number 2, we did not have the continents yet, we did not have the dry land, all of that's day number 3. But let's get to day number 2. We have illustrated this in vivid detail. Now, the word for that firmament is rakia in the Hebrew. It's a very special word. The word for firmament means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arch of heaven in thin metal sheets. Metal sheets? That threw us. That threw scholars worldwide. Researcher Dan Cook called and said, I understand you're doing research on the world before Noah's flood. I said, that's correct. He said, I have spent over 20 years in major laboratories preoccupied with the question about the world before Noah's flood. And he said, after years and decades of research, he said, I know what metal was in that firmament. And I said by long-distance telephone, Dan, now wait a minute, was there real metal in that firmament? And he said, that's what the Hebrew word means. And I said, I understand that. It is rakia. It means to compress, pound together, and stretch out this arc of heaven, or arch of heaven, in thin metal sheets. But I said, that I've taken to be figurative. He said, it won't work figuratively. He said, unless it's literal, you can't keep it in suspension. Won't work figuratively. I said, all right, I'm listening. I said, no, wait a minute, you got a problem. Because on day number 4, the light of day 1 was coalesced into star bodies, the sun, the moon, the greater light ruling the day and the lesser light ruling the night, and the influence of the stars were all felt, and the biblical record states that God set those stars, and you could see them more brightly and more vividly and in better color than we can today. If you have a metal vault, you're not going to be able to see the sunlight or the starlight or the light of the moon reflected and coming in. He said, wait a minute, don't you know that most metals in their pure state are transparent? I said, I wasn't aware of that. He said, don't you remember that when our astronauts walked on the surface of the moon, the visors of their helmets actually contained a thin coating of gold, pure gold, micro-thin, and it was transparent. They could look out on the surface of the moon and actually see all the details in vivid relief. I said, that's amazing. You can look through pure gold. He said, that's right. He said, that's not all. I know what metal was in this firmament. He later came to the museum and reiterated that at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories, they had done some experiments with the elements of water. Now remember, at that point in time in creation, we only had the space-time dimension, the field of energy, and the tangible water in a spherical mass as planet Earth. That was all day number 1. But on day number 2, again, you simply had the water in tangible form. So Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories took the elements of water inadvertently. They compressed them. Now remember, the word rekia means to compress and pound together. They compressed them and added energy. The water molecules of oxygen simply turned blue. But when they got to the hydrogen, they found a very special thing. The hydrogen, when compressed, with energy added, under super cold cryogenic circumstances, the hydrogen bonded into a crystalline lattice, took upon itself a very unique form in crystalline lattice, was first transparent, later became opaque. Other laboratories followed up, and what we've enlarged here is a very small section of an experiment. This is actually 1/1,000,000,000th of a cubic inch of space encompassed, and we've enlarged it here. You'll see the actual photograph here. The lab photo shows the dark areas as hydrogen taking on a metallic context. The lighter areas show hydrogen in crystalline form, metallic hydrogen, but transparent. The transparent area, veins, are not superconductive, but the opaque area is actually superconductive. Now, we're not talking about a wide band in this firmament. Probably at most just a few inches thick. That's all that's necessary. And superconductivity is a very special phenomenon. When the hydrogen became opaque, you could not see through it, but it became opaque simply in veins. The entire structure did not become opaque. That still leaves the channels for the light to stream directly through, because the vast bulk of the material is crystalline hydrogen in a transparent form, metallic but transparent. But the superconductive material, metallic hydrogen, does a very special job. I have a photo here from NASA, and I'd like to show you this photo that has made the front page issue of one of NASA's briefs. Here is a superconductive material at fingertip. Here is a magnet. And remember, the Earth has a magnetic field. The Earth is one giant magnet. Here you have the magnet suspended above the superconductive material, or you can do it the other way with no difficulty. It'll hang at the bottom, or the superconductive material will suspend above the magnet. Now that's amazing. That means that this thin layer of bonded metallic hydrogen, superconductive in veins, tiny veins, transparent in the rest of the material, would actually hold the firmament in suspension above the Earth. Now that answers so many, many problems. There is a gentle glow that hydrogen bears when it is energized. I brought today a very special instrument. I brought a supply of electrical energy, and I brought a little tube, a little flask with hydrogen. And we want to turn the energy on to energize the hydrogen, and it glows a very special color. As we turn the energy on, I want you to notice the special color that hydrogen glows. It's pink. Technically, it's 6365 angstrom magenta. That's pink. Notice the oxygen also is glowing blue, but in the center area, the compressed area, the hydrogen overpowers the blue of the oxygen, and thus you get a pink color. Now, you have seen that pink color at sunrise and often at sunset. Just before sunrise, you see a glow of pink. The basic reason you see that glow of pink is that the water molecules are charged by the consistent, lower level, intense rays of the sun's energy. When they're charged, the blue is seen from the oxygen radiation, but the magenta pink of the hydrogen overpowers the blue for just those few moments because you have intense energy field lines, and you see pink. At sunset, you see some of that color, but it's contaminated by dust particles in the atmosphere. What I'm suggesting is that there was a gentle pinkish glow in that crystalline firmament. I have a pair of pink glasses. I wore them to the studio today. Any moment I get in the car, automatically, before I turn the switch on, I put my pink glasses on. An amazing thing happens. Research indicates that when you look through pink or look at pink, and it has to be the right level of pink, when you look at the right level of pink, or 6365 angstrom magenta, your brain generates norepinephrine. That's a neurotransmitter. A number of individuals at the museum have put on these glasses and have had their dyslexia altered to some degree because of the neuron transmission problem. Now, I'm not claiming a pharmaceutical or physical benefit. I'm simply saying that it's very interesting to see the benefits. Recently, I had a psychiatrist call, and she said, my associate, she said, we're publishing psychiatrist, and my associate has an attention deficit syndrome problem. And he has to be on heavy medication, and that, of course, to some degree diminishes our practice and our ability to publish. And she said he saw one of your tapes or read one of your books about the pink glasses. He ordered a pair of pink glasses. And after just a couple of days of wearing those, he threw away his medication. Now, I'm not suggesting that you throw away your medication. I'm not claiming any benefits at all. I'm simply saying that it's very interesting to note that a number of people, simply by looking through pink, have had a marvelous transformation to some degree in their impairment. Now, let's solve another problem. I put on these glasses, and the world does not look pink. In fact, the blue lines strike in front of the retina, but the red lines strike directly on the retina, and actually colors are enhanced looking through these pink glasses. The world is a more vivid, brighter place to live. So I'm saying that before the flood, the world didn't have a pinkish cast. The sky had a gentle pinkish cast. And it probably had that cast of pink dominating through the morning hours. It would change at high noon probably to a much lighter pink, and then deepen in the evening hours. And incidentally, watch closely, research found that not only did that hydrogen in its transparent form transmit all the spectra of light, so that you got all of the intense colors coming right through all the visible colors, but it filtered out the shortwave radiation, and it became fiber optic. That is, it transferred the energy of this light throughout the firmament. What this means is the sunlight of day shining on the day side of the earth in the firmament actually had its light transferred diminishingly to the night side, which means when the Scripture states that the greater light, the sun, rule the day, and the lesser light rule the night, that certainly involved the moon, but it involved more than the moon. It involved the transfer of energy from the day side through this fiber optic firmamental canopy to the night side as well. That means that in all probability before the flood, there was no midnight darkness. That meant that dusk, which is one of our very finest times of the 24-hour cycle, actually had the ambient glow carried all night long. That meant that the stars would be seen in more vivid detail because the red filter was built in, so the full color of the stars could be seen. But that means you had no midnight darkness. At midnight, it probably was about like the ambient dusk of day in intensity of light. It's quite natural that an infant is afraid of the dark once they're able to see. It's quite natural that men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. It's quite natural that light is beneficial. So the greater light ruled the day and the lesser light ruled the night. That lesser light, again, certainly was the moon, but it also, I believe, involved transfer of light fiber optically through that canopy. Now, I said a moment ago this would solve a lot of major problems. It certainly would. Our research has indicated that once the creation week was complete, this bubble of water, water above, water beneath, in just a very thin film with hydrogen structurally interlaminated within that water, crystalline hydrogen, in thin veins that were opaque, but more normal veins that were transparent, assimilating the light, also assimilated the short wave energy. This solves a major problem. Creationists have advisedly pointed out that if we were to go back with the intensity of the Earth's magnetic field decreasing exponentially every few hundred years, if we were to extrapolate back in time between 15 and 20,000 years ago, the intensity of that field would run off the chart. The Earth's magnetic field would have the intensity of a magnetic star, and that is totally implausible. Life systems could not function. They could not function even 10,000 years ago. So we're talking about a very brief period of time in Earth history, like between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago. Recently, I received a fax, handwritten, And I've learned through the years to read the signature of a letter before reading the letter. I want to know who's speaking. And at the bottom of the fax, handwritten, it said, Dr. David Otway Ray, W-R-A-Y. The next line said, Senior Academician, Academy of Sciences, USSR. The next 4 lines listed academies of science in the Eastern Bloc nations where he was a member. So I decided I'd better read that letter. I glanced up at the top, and he began, handwritten. Dear Dr. Ball, I saw you speak on satellite television, and I agree with your model. I can fill missing areas in that model. Well, I decided I better read the letter. In the letter he said, I'm lecturing, I'm on sabbatical in the United States, I'm lecturing, and he named the particular university, and said, please contact me. And he gave the telephone number at the home where he was staying. It was about 3 days before my schedule permitted any lengthy conversation, so I called him after 3 days. And he said, I've been waiting up for you to call all this time. And I was sorry to have inconvenienced him. And he said, I want you to know that your model works. I said, all right. What's your background? He said, I work in quantum algebra. He said, there are only a handful of scholars who work in this discipline. And he said, I began as an atheist, you can understand, because all scholars in Russia at that time were atheists. And he said, I knew the Bible could not be true. I knew there could not be a personal God and a creator of the universe. And I had the academic background to prove that statistically. So he said, I took the statements of the book of Genesis and I put them into the algebraic form. And he said, the formula that I worked out, covering all the broad spectra, took 8 pages to work out. I took it to my colleagues and I said, check this. The colleagues checked and said, well, the formula's right, the math is right, we just don't like the results you found. Go back and work it again. He went back and it came out the same way, and he had them check it again. And he said they couldn't disagree with the math, but they disagreed with the final results. And I said, what were your results? And he said, what I found was, with impeccable mathematic scrutiny, that the universe is just a few thousand years old. I said, Dr. Ray, how many thousands of years old? He said between 6,000 and 10,000 years. That's all the leeway I could get out of the formula and out of the math. And he said, I realized that if the universe is that young, the entire universe, not just planet Earth, if the universe is that young, then it had to be designed, it had to be created. And I knew there was only one plausible creator, and that was the creator of the Bible. And I knew I had to read the Bible, and I had to get right with that creator. I said, did you do it? He said, yes. I want you to know that I found that there's only one plausible way to know that creator, and that's through the person, the expression of himself, the person of his Son, Jesus Christ. And he said, I now know Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. That is a tremendous testimony from a world-class scholar. Now, back to the point in the last moments of this lecture. This model that I'm proposing to you, Creation in Symphony, answers major problems. Creation scholars such as Dr. Russell Humphreys, Dr. Thomas Barnes, other outstanding creation scholars have certainly been right in concluding that whether the decay is a free decay or dynamic decay, it all shows that the decay has been exponential. And that decay of the Earth's magnetic field means that creation was just a short time in the past, between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago. But until this model, and exclusively held in this model, until this model, we had not addressed another major issue. If the Creator designed the creation just a few thousand years ago, with the Earth's magnetic field decaying exponentially, which to this point is all that has been addressed, that means that there was an interdiction at the time of the flood, disrupting that, a slight buildup around the time of Christ's visit to earth, and that's quite astounding. The magnetism in the rock showed it was a little stronger 2,000 years ago. It had been weaker previously, it had dipped, it was stronger, it continued to exponentially decay. There have been some interdictions with this, there have been some convulsions, but the problem is this: if the Earth's magnetic field began with an exponential decay, showing that it was created recently, that means that the Creator wrote into the formula a decay that in a very short period of time would disrupt the optimal expression of the life forms. For both in Russia and the United States, scholars have found that living systems depend on the strength of that magnetic field. In fact, it is so low in intensity at this point that effective cellular communication is disrupted and is insufficient. However, our model, Creation in Symphony, addresses the issue like this. It addresses the issue from a standpoint that involves your personal life and well-being. That means that on day number 2, as the firmament was created, it began to assemble the short wave energy into the very firmament itself, and subsequently to share that energy with the Earth's magnetic field on which that firmament rode, suspended with superconductive levitation. That being the case, that means that it was constantly re-energized as we living systems used its energy. You see, there are no free lunches. As we use the energy, something has to pay for that energy. Thus, the orchestral creation model, Creation in Symphony, shows that the balance of all of the energy from all the stellar bodies, the stars, the sun, the moon, reflection from other planets, constellations and galaxies at a great distance, all actually intervened and contributed for the life of man. That is astounding. The life of man. In the next session, we'll talk about the anthropic principle. Was the creation, was the universe designed for the benefit of man? Evidence in physics shows that it certainly was. With this model, the canopy of the earth assimilated the light, the shortwave radiation, filtered out that shortwave radiation so that we would not have decay from ultraviolet radiation. It kept that charge intact. But at the time of the flood, later at the time of Peleg, we had disruptions and we have an exponential decay. More about that in later lectures. This also solves the problem of carbon-14. Anytime a bone is found, anytime an artifact is found, the press very rapidly announces there was a carbon dating done on it, very little carbon was in it, therefore that means that it's extremely old. Our position is that the Earth system and the entire universe is quite young, just thousands of years in age. Watch this. The basic ultraviolet radiation which comes in to us today is a problem for us. Cancer is generated on the surface of the skin by mutational damaging change. But it also does something else. We lost that bubble. We lost that firmament at the time of the flood. It collapsed. And the system to re-energize the Earth's magnetic field collapsed along with it. Subsequently, over a period of centuries, we lost the suspension of water molecules in the upper atmosphere to such a degree that ultraviolet radiation streams in at an alarming rate. Not only does that ultraviolet radiation harm living systems by generating cancer, by generating free radicals, we ingest those free radicals, they bond to the cellular structure, even to the DNA. Radicalized oxygen is a major problem. It bonds to almost any chemical agent it comes in contact with. We ingest all of that, and we're damaging ourselves to a major degree. We don't have that firmamental canopy any longer. But it also did something else. The loss of that canopy and the influx of ultraviolet radiation charges particles in the upper atmosphere. This charge of particles causes an actual neutron to be emitted. It's assimilated by nitrogen-14 in the upper atmosphere. In turn, nitrogen-14 expels an electron or photons, and in the process, it transmutes to carbon-14. Carbon-14 is not normal in the life chain. Carbon-12 and carbon-13 are normal in the life chain. Carbon-14 is radioactive. The principle is if you find after 5,600 years or so, carbon-14 having lost half its mass, if you find something with very little carbon-14, that means it's been around a long time. Not so. Since we know the firmament was there in the creation model, since we know it would have filtered out the ultraviolet radiation, that means the primary generation of carbon-14 would have not been functional at all. That means that if you find something with very little carbon-14, it simply means it was deposited approximately at the time of Noah's flood. It does not mean it was extremely old at all. The creation model answers so many problems, and in the next session, we'll get closer to home.
Much more is waiting to be explored. Don't miss our next journey into the music of the spheres.